Welcome, everyone, to episode 43 of the RDH Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chad. Joined alongside me is my brother, Tanner. How's it hanging, dude?
It's good. It's really good. I shaved my face. I don't like it. I look like a little baby, but this is the adventures of manhood that we have to deal with. So that's not the most eventful thing that's happened in the past week or so, but there's had a good weekend, hung out with some friends, didn't watch the Pro Bowl. And yeah, no, that was pretty fun.
Yeah, that makes two of us that didn't watch Pro Bowl. Can't say I've watched Pro Bowl in a very long time. Didn't even watch the NHL All-Star game either. Haven't watched that one in a while too. It just that I love the NHL All-Star Week, like what they did this year with
hmm
everything that they did, but in the jerseys and all the celebrities and everything, I thought it was awesome. All the engagement with the fans was so cool. But at the end of the day, it's just like goalies letting players score for me just makes me so angry. I like playing hockey my whole life. I see that I'm like, I can't even watch this. But enough hate on the Pro Bowl and the All Star games. This is RDH Sports. Today we're talking college football, NFL. We got part one of the college wide receiver prospects profile coming up. We got the latest NFL coaching news and the Super Bowl, of course. Tanner, are you ready to jump into some football talk?
I'm always ready, Chad.
There we go. All right, we're going to start off with some NFL draft talk. For those of you who haven't listened to the pod before, RDH Sports, you can find us on YouTube. That's our YouTube channel, RDH Sports, on Instagram at RDH.sports, TikTok at RDH.sports, Facebook, RDH Sports, we're a podcast page. But just wanted to let you guys know all the socials so you can follow us because we're dropping content all the time now. Thanks to Tanner. He's awesome in that. And we're going to jump into some NFL draft talk. For those of you that don't like my voice, I apologize because you're going to hear it for a while now because we got about 7 wide receivers we're going to hit. But first, last week I released the quarterback prospect profiles, and I got some comments about JJ McCarthy. So I went back and looked. I saw multiple reports that his 40-yard dash, he was running in the 4.6s and 4.8s range. For me, that's not necessarily a scrambling quarterback. But, I went back and looked, and apparently in October, there's an unofficial report that he ran a 4.4, 4.5 40. So I said that he wasn't a scrambler, but to me, I still am not seeing a scrambler when I'm watching him. I went back and watched 2 different games I haven't seen him play before. Still not really seeing the scrambling ability. But you know what? Hey, I'll admit when I'm wrong. And the NFL Combine's coming up. And we'll see what JJ McCarthy runs. And if JJ McCarthy runs 4.6 or under, I'll admit it. But until then, I'm still technically right. But we're jumping into part one of the wide receiver prospect profiles. We're going to start with Adonai Mitchell, the wide receiver out of Texas. He's a junior. His draft grade is a late second round, and his draft projection for me is also a late second round grade. So the stats don't jump off the page when I'm looking at this wide receiver. 3 seasons where the highest receiving yard total was about 700 to 800 yards a season. I would have liked to see a little bit more production from this player in college, but I will say whenever the ball is anywhere near him, he always seems to make the catch. Mitchell has only accounted for 1 drop in 3 years. So let me repeat that. Mitchell has only accounted for 1 drop in 3 years, and that alone shows the great catching ability of this player. He also averages around 15 yards per catch, is in a deep threat on the outside, which is exactly why this player could easily sneak into the second round of the NFL draft. So that's Adonai Mitchell. Now we're going to jump to Jalen Polk, the wide receiver out of Washington. He's a sophomore. Draft grade is mid to late second round. Draft projection is also mid to late second round. So this is a lanky wide receiver. And this kid uses his length and strength to go up and get the ball pretty much every single time. Very elusive player in the open field, and I really like the moves he has in his bag. He had over 1,000 receiving yards this season and is an absolute complete wide receiver. This player averages over 15 yards a catch, which is why he's projected a deep ball, go up and get it threat at the next level. Polk and Odunze, his counterpart for Washington, gave many opponents fits, and it was so fun to watch this duo out of Washington this season. This kid's good. Washington has not had this many good wide receivers in one draft class in a little while. Washington recently, the Huskies, have been putting in some top end talent. And this year, I think they're going to have 2 wide receivers. They're going to go in the top 2 rounds. I don't see Jalen Polk going into the first round, but I do see him falling into the mid to late second round, like I was saying. So that's really exciting for Washington football specifically. And I haven't even got to Odunze yet. And Odunze is my number 2 wide receiver in this draft class. Xavier Worthy, another Texas wide receiver. He's a junior. My draft grade on him is also mid to late second round. My draft projection is a late second round. I don't necessarily think he's going to go in the mid second round, but I could see late second round. Um, here's the thing though. Xavier Worthy had way more production throughout college than his counterpart Mitchell. So that's a big plus for me in that category. He's a burner, and he had a great game against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship. This player can turn on the Jets when needed and has over 100 targets for each of his 3 seasons.
Wow.
When a player is consistently getting that many targets a season, he immediately jumps into the top tier group of this wide receiver class. And my favorite thing about this player is his run after catch ability. It's something that turns heads at the next level and is one of his best traits. And this is the player that I cannot wait to see his routes at the NFL Combine, because if he runs crisp routes, I think he can get pushed into the mid second round. Tanner, I know you didn't want me to leave out your boy from Oregon, Troy Franklin. Wide receiver, Oregon, junior, late first round to early second round grade for this player. My draft projection is also a late, early second round. This is an Oregon wide receiver that broke pretty much every school record during his junior season at Oregon. He had over 1,300 receiving yards, 100 targets, and 14 touchdowns in his junior season. This player was the majority of this offense this season with Bo Nix and was clearly his favorite target. I'm projecting this kid to be taken in the end of the first round with the ability to fall to day 2 in the early second round. If he falls to the early second round, I could even see teams trading up to get Franklin because he's that exciting. Primarily for me, this player is a deep ball threat with the ability to jump in the slot at times. But if you blink, Troy's going to get behind you for the deep catch, and that's his best trait. And that is why I'm excited to see him continue to be that home run hitter in the NFL for many Sundays. Tanner, I know you watched Bo Nix a ton, and this is the guy that he was getting the ball thrown to every single time. So I cannot wait to see what he's going to do on Sundays. Now, I have a friend of mine who told me to watch the LSU wide receivers this year, and I'm really glad I listened to him. This is Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU. He's a junior. His draft grade is a late first round. Draft projection is a late first round. Could fall into the early second round, but that'd be tough to see this player fall into the second round. He's an LSU wide receiver that took a massive jump for his sophomore to his junior season. His counterpart, Neighbors, had a more impressive season than Thomas Jr., but made a case for himself, potentially be taken in the first round of the NFL draft. You know what I mean? He had over 1,000 receiving yards, 17 touchdowns, and many incredible run after catch plays during his junior season. This player has the ability to walk into an NFL team and start as a wide receiver 2 this season. And if he continues to get better at the rate that he's going, then he's looking at the wide receiver 1 job by the end of his second year in the league. Oh, and by the way, I don't think this is the best LSU wide receiver in this draft class. Moving on to the other LSU wide receiver, Malik Neighbors. Oh my goodness, I'm just going to say that. Draft grade is an early first round. Draft projection is an early first round. This draft class is absolutely loaded with top-end wide receiver talent, and Neighbors, he's no exception. He's a 3-year player that surpassed 1,000 receiving yards, 200-plus targets, and 17 touchdowns in his previous 2 seasons. That's pretty decent. Neighbors, he's looking to continue the trend of being an LSU wide receiver drafted in the first round, and he lined up everywhere on the field, splitting his time between the slot and the wide outside position. Versatility off the charts, and to me, as a top wide receiver in this class against man coverage, he's better than Marvin Harrison Jr. this season in man coverage with the games I was watching. Fascinating to me that 3 wide receivers could go in the top 10 in this year's draft. No joke. I think Neighbors, Odunze, and Marvin Harrison Jr. are going to be in the top 10 this year. I could really easily see teams also rank Neighbors and Odunze extremely close to each other. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has set himself above those 2 receivers, but I'm interested to see if Neighbors or Odunze get selected after Marvin Harrison Jr. Which one goes first? Now, jumping to Washington here, I know we're going quick. We're going rapid fire because we had 8 of these guys. Rome Odunze, the Washington wide receiver, junior, draft grade early first round draft projection, early first round for me. I'm convinced that if Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't in this wide receiver class, Odunze would easily make a strong case for the best wide receiver here. Easily. He looks really big when he plays. His size jumps off the tape to me. He finds openings when running routes and becomes surprisingly wide open at times, especially in big games, which you usually do not see wide receivers of this caliber get open that much in big games because they've got big time defenders, but not this guy. The past 2 seasons, he had over 1,000 receiving yards and 100 targets each year. It's 6'3", 215. Opposing defensive backs just straight up had trouble tackling this wide receiver. And when they went up to go get the ball in 50-50 situations, the defensive backs usually failed and Odunze usually brought the ball in. He was one of the finalists this year for the best wide receiver in college football. Oh, and by the way, he had almost 10 100-yard receiving games in his previous couple seasons at Washington. Tanner, I'm going to stop here because I know I've been going on for a while now, and I know you wanted to jump in on Odunze and Marvin Harrison Jr. in this draft class. What do you think about Romeo Odunze? Do you think that he makes himself a pretty solid case for the number 2 wide receiver in this draft class?
I mean, easily. Like it, welcome back. I'm here, I promise. But I'm really confident that he is just one of those top two guys. Obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. is the cream of the crop. His route running ability is excellent. He just kind of finds openings just seamlessly, and he always catches the ball in tough situations and always he's always involved in the offense. He's at Ohio State, big time school. But Odunze, he's at Washington. It's not as big of a school, but he's still making all these headlines. He's still doing it every single game. And like you said, he's doing it in the biggest games. I mean, go look at that playoff run with his past national championship where Michigan won. He had a big game in the final. It wasn't his biggest game of the season, but he was obviously the leading passer. And against Texas, he had a really good game too. Not to mention his counterpart Polk also had a very good game as well. Say what you will about the Texas defenders, but they're diming him up. Like, they're playing really well, and he is playing probably. Like you said, if Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't there, I think he's the best in the country. Like, it sucks because Marvin Harrison Jr. is just one of those guys that you can't pass on, but I really like him. I think his route running ability is probably one of the best in the class, if not the best. I think it's at least on par with Harrison Jr.'s, and I think that you kind of said it very, very well. He just finds these openings in like the zones and like the man coverages and things like that. He's able to kind of like create a step and create separation from defenders very, very well, especially when he is kind of that, like that number one receiver. He's on the side, he's not necessarily, always going to burn someone, but he's going to use his ability to get open. You know what I mean? So I really like that about him. Unfortunate that big catch in the national championship where him and Penix Jr. weren't on the same page, but like he has that ability in those big games, and that's a great example of like what could have happened, So I really like him. Marvis Harrison Jr. is also very similar. We've gone over him a little bit, so I won't go in too depth, but I think he's the best receiver in this class, and I don't think it's really close,
And we're gonna jump to that. This is the last wide receiver we get to hit on, and the reason I hit so many of those wide receivers in a row is because those aren't necessarily the guys that are going to get taken in the first round. And we've gotten a lot of listeners that like to listen to this show, and typically, in the first round, Tanner and myself know about 120 guys in this class. We know pretty much everybody through the fourth round. I don't think I've ever watched an NFL draft in recent years not knowing a guy in the fifth, sixth, seventh round. But we do a ton of draft knowledge on this show, and there's so many players that I go into and watch tape with that I'm going to fire these guys off. And also, if you have any players that you want me to check out, shoot us a message once again on all of our socials, RDH Sports, RDH.sports. Just shoot us a message. Website is rdhsports.net, and we will answer any questions you have about these prospects. And if you have a guy that you think maybe is a later round prospect, I'd love to hear his name because chances are I've already watched him. But we love the interaction we've gotten from the fans, and that's why we're going to keep talking about the draft and keep posting this stuff on all of our socials, because we posted the JJ McCarthy one and the Bo Nix one, and y'all have loved it so far. So last one of this podcast. Next podcast, we'll give you a little surprise of who we're going to go into next podcast. But last one, Tanner said it. He alluded to it. This is the prospect profile, the official one of Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver out of Ohio State. Once again, he is a junior. Marvin Harrison Jr. Draft grade, easily top 5 pick. Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. in this draft class, to me, are the best 2 prospects, and his draft projection is absolutely an early first round. I'm so confident that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be an early first round pick that I think that I project him to be the first offensive player taken off the board in the NFL draft that is not a quarterback, and or first player. I'll take the offensive out. First player taken off the board that's not a quarterback. I think quarterbacks always go, very quickly in the beginning of the round. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the number 1 player taken that is not a quarterback in this draft. The best wide receiver I have seen coming out of college in a very, very long time. He possesses speed and quickness with elite footwork, a walk-in wide receiver 1 in the NFL, and ready to take his game to the next level year after year after year. Not to mention, if you know the name Harrison Jr., you know something. You know what I mean? You know something. His pop was legendary Colts wide receiver Marvin Harrison, Super Bowl winning Marvin Harrison. So he is his dad and more, which is absolutely insane to think about. Whenever I hear about elite athletes and great athletes, and Marvin Harrison Jr. was one of those, or Marvin Harrison was one of those guys at the next level, I always get scared to think about what the kid could potentially be. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is next level, and he has the production and more. Okay, he's levels above every wide receiver in this year's class, in my opinion, and has potential to be another wide receiver taken in the top 5 picks in the NFL draft. In my opinion, this is the only wide receiver that has made a case in most recent years that can be taken number 2 overall. If I'm sitting there and I'm Washington and I don't trade up to get Caleb Williams at number 1, this is easily the number 2 pick. Even though there's other quarterbacks available, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a generational talent and is one of the best college football prospects I have ever seen coming out of Ohio State. Tanner, what do you think about the magic that this player possesses?
Uh, I like I said, I kind of alluded to it, but he's always there in the biggest situations. We talked about Odunze. He's always shows up in these big games, and he really does. But Marvin Harrison is Ohio State. It's like Odunze, they have Penix, they have Polk, they've got a lot of good defensive guys. But Ohio State, while they do have a lot of good players, this team wouldn't be the same without Harrison Jr. He is the entire offense. No offense to the other guys, but he makes the world go around for Ohio State. And go look at his tape, go look at his film. Every single game, he's wide open, just wide open. And that's not because, he's playing, inferior opponents. It's not because he's getting schemed open. All of those things are true, but you also have to add the greatness of just him and his footwork and his ability to get open. It always looks like when the ball is passed to him, it's like, why was he was like 10 yards down the field and no one's looking at him. You know what I mean? It's like, why he's like he's in front of the safeties. They should be looking at him. He's behind the linebackers. They can't do anything. They don't know what it's like, it just makes it look so easy. And I think that's just, you have to attribute to him. You have to attribute to his ability to, understanding the coverage that he's going against, understanding the man coverage that he's been put in. It's a lot more of just football IQ. At this level, the thing that separates people is football IQ, your ability to understand the game, and he understands it at a high level. So that's what makes him my top prospect. Obviously, I'm a little biased with Ohio State because I do like them, but I think it's on most people's boards, he's the number 1. But I do want to expand the question a little bit. Who do you think? And you've listed off a bunch of names. Who's like your dark horse in this year's among the receivers that you've looked at so far? Who's the guy that you could see, maybe a later round guy, maybe someone who can jump off the page and kind of be that next level starter that you wouldn't expect coming out of the draft?
Yeah, I mean, it's right. You can't ever say that a dark horse in this draft is going to be a top guy, right? But
right.
you already know for me that Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and Malik Neighbors, those 3 guys, we can't even put them into that category,
And no,
right? Like
yeah,
those
below
guys,
that.
yeah, just exactly. Just to let everybody know, those guys are not in this conversation. Um, that's a hard question.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really hard question because you know me. I'm watching like 120, 150 guys, so I've got about 50 guys that I would consider, you know what I mean, like a pet cat or somebody that's like hey, right, like a Logan Wilson, right, a guy
Yeah,
that not a
exactly.
lot of people thought was going to be taken quick. But here's what I'll say with the guys that we covered today. I think that the guy that has the potential to just come in and just like by storm, I think that Franklin has the opportunity out of Oregon, who I talked about. When when you have over 100 targets and 1,300 receiving yards, I get it that Bo Nix is throwing you the ball, but at times he looked like the greatest receiver in college football. But I'm not going to put him into this conversation necessarily because he could also sneak into the first round. But I just want to say his name because that kid I think is going to change some heads at the next level. I really do. But I look at Jalen Polk because he's kind of lanky.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? He's kind of that lanky guy. And you know who's made a ton who's had a ton of success in the NFL, who's been super lanky. He has bounced around, maybe not necessarily like the sexiest guy in terms of production and everything. Reynolds, Josh Reynolds from Texas A&M, who's bounced around multiple teams, who
Yes.
just does nothing but catch touchdowns in big games. Like I almost think that Josh Reynolds and Jamison Williams, a mix between those two players, gives me Jalen Polk.
I can see that.
It's hard because Jalen Polk, no one's going to be as fast as old Jamison Williams,
Mhm.
but Jalen Polk is a guy that is really interesting to me in the second round, and I don't think he's going to go in the first round. So if you're a second round team sitting there going, "Oh, we didn't get our guy in the first round," he's sitting right there. So that's definitely a guy that I could see. Another guy that I want to actually pull up my prospects for because I've only watched a couple games of his and I like to watch like 50 games before I like make a, you know, this is my guy type thing.
Mhm.
But there's a kid out of Florida State that's not the number one out of Florida State. Okay. This kid is named, he's old. His name's Johnny Wilson. He's a mid third round grade for me. I need to watch more tape on him, but I think he could do pretty well. I think that's the guy that's in the third round that you're sitting there going, I don't know too much about this guy. But then you turn on the tape and you're like, hold on. Why was he not taken in the first two rounds? A bit of inconsistent play, tends to disappear at a little bit of times. But if he can lock in all the time, that's another guy that I could see. So I would say those are my two dark horses for potentially not going in, but not going in the first round for sure.
Yeah.
But I would say those are a couple of my guys.
I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah, I also too just want to kind of shout you out a little bit. I don't do a ton of research on this, if like that much at all. But like you go ham. So like, very appreciative. This is kind of like your thing. So I really appreciate you doing this. I think you're very good at it too, and I think a lot of other people, if you're listening too, you got to give Chad some credit here. He puts a lot of time into this, and this is like his life for like 4 or 5 months out of the year, probably a lot more too, because, including the football season itself. But just want to shout you out a little bit. Just want to, put your name out there and give you the credit that you deserve.
I appreciate that, Tanner, and that's why it works so well together. Tanner's the engineer that brings this thing, makes me look somewhat presentable on camera. You know what I mean? Takes like an hour and a half to get the face thing going. Okay, NFL. We're done with college for this episode. We're hitting an NFL. Tanner, it is time for you to rip this thing off. Dan Quinn named the new head coach of the Washington Commanders, shittiest name in the league. Then Cliff Kingsbury turns on Vegas in the middle of the night, just shoves him out of the way, kicks him out of the door, throws him in the dirt, whatever you want to say, back of the knee, bam, goes to Washington, is the new offensive coordinator. I've got 3 questions. I'm just going to start with one.
Go for it.
What do you think of these hires? I'm going to stop there because I could talk for an hour and a half about these guys. Go ahead.
Let's start with Dan Quinn. I think he's the the biggest one right now. Sorry if you hear a lot in the background. There's a cat just going absolutely ham. But with Dan Quinn, I really didn't expect this because initially I was kind of like, oh, he's gonna go to Seattle. That's kind of where I'm expecting him to go. With his ties with the old Seattle defensive coordinator job. But I don't really. it kind of baffles me with Washington because I'm really not sure what they're doing. This is just another I'd hire from them that I'm just like, why?
Really?
Why I'm not a big fan of it. I'm really not. I really like Dan Quinn as a defensive coordinator in Dallas. I think he deserves a head coaching job, but in my opinion, where's the talent? They look like they're in a rebuilding phase, which we've kind of talked about. And the only reason I can kind of think of bringing Dan Quinn in is because I think he's a good evaluator of talent, especially when it comes to corners and secondary members in general. But I mean, Washington just kind of sold like half their defense away. They're not really competing offensively at all, and they haven't been for the past 5 years ish, probably a lot more. In recent memory, Washington's offense has not been good, and they've had probably one of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL in Terry McLaurin. So they've also added a lot of talent with Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson Jr. So it's like, why? Why don't you bring in an offensive-minded head coach? Because the struggles that you've been having in the past years have been offensive, and that's very clear to see. Their defense has been fine. They've been drafting well. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, the guys they just got rid of. But, Jonathan Allen in there too. But I understand the need for Dan Quinn, big defense. He's going to get this defense going well and the team's going to be great. But that's not the issue. Their defense is fine. It's been fine the past couple years. The offense is the thing that struggled. They've struggled in games to put up points sometimes. They play well against Philly. That's the only big offensive games I usually see with Washington. They've been having struggles with quarterback, and the rest of their offensive unit looks pretty good on paper. What's going on? Which kind of brings me to the second point, Cliff Kingsbury. I like him as an offensive coordinator. I do, and I think that's why they brought him in, because they want to get that offense that has worked so well. The guy who famously made Patrick Mahomes. It's just let's get him in here. Let's do it. I saw him. I got to watch him coach in Aggie Land. That was awesome. I really like him. So I think I give that one, an A, maybe probably an A on the higher. I really like Kingsbury. He's bounced around. With like we said recently with the Raiders, I don't really know what was going on there. I heard it was contract disputes and stuff like that, just disagreements on money and stuff like that, and length and time and stuff. But one move is yes, I really like the Cliff Kingsbury move. But the other side, I wouldn't have hired Dan Quinn as my head coach. I'm just not a big fan.
Just to hit on the points that you did, especially with the other candidates that are still out there.
Exactly.
Right? That's my thing. It's look, I understand Dan Quinn is, pretty, I would say the closest coach to ever winning a Super Bowl in Super Bowl history. And then there's a guy named Tom Brady that just happened to be yeah, sorry, not going to happen. By the way, even though Tom Brady's not listening to the podcast, I've played Madden a lot, and that challenge comes up all the time. And I just got to say, I hate it because it's the hardest thing on the planet to do, to come back 28 points in a challenge in Madden. But anyway, I agree with you. The Dan Quinn hire, it's one of those things where it's and toward the end of the season with the Cowboys too, it's he wasn't doing well on the defensive side. In the playoffs, they got smacked by the Packers. And I'm gonna say with 100% confidence that Dallas's defense is 5-6 times as good as Washington is right now. Washington's the lowest, I'd say top or bottom 5 in the league, if not bottom 3 in the league
on paper
in terms of roster.
Better.
Yeah. In terms of roster. So that's that there. And then the thing is with Cliff Kingsbury, I think that saves this.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that completely saves it. I completely agree with you. Cliff Kingsbury's made a lot of quarterbacks. He's made Kyler, right? Cliff Kingsbury has made a lot of quarterbacks. And Bleacher Report and/or ESPN reported on it earlier. As soon as Kingsbury went there, the first thing in my head, and I knew I should have said something. What happens to the number 2 overall pick? Because you're telling me that Cliff Kingsbury going to the Washington Commanders does not have the Bears kind of scratching their head a little bit, going, wait a second, this trade might not, it could happen. It could really happen, because guess who recruited Caleb Williams at USC? Kingsbury,
Mm-hmm.
right? He not only knows Caleb Williams. Well, no, if I'm not mistaken, I think he actually recruited Caleb Williams at Oklahoma, and then Caleb Williams followed him to UFC, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure that's how it went. But that's massive because Caleb Williams, I'm a Cowboy fan. Please don't go to Washington.
Dude,
Please don't go to Washington.
I
Don't
think
go to any NFC.
I think
Don't
that
do it.
I think that trade is really, really likely. Like I think that Washington, they're number two. Like they're number two. They don't have to trade that much. Obviously, it's Caleb Williams. Give him the house. That's what I would do. But if you're Washington, that's where I would go. I would trade the entire house. It's not like you have anything back there, anyways. So just
I'm wondering what they could do because Washington is the team that already traded the entire house to go get a quarterback with RG3 and is still dealing with the repercussions of that trade.
mm-hmm.
And for me personally, if I'm Chicago, I'm sitting there going, Caleb Williams, like we know who you're getting. In my opinion, we know who you're getting number one in the NFL draft. Like I think everybody knows. I think there's like 80 something days till the draft. I think there's going to be a lot of stir in the media of who could potentially go number one. I would throw that all out of the window because I think it's automatic 100% lock. Caleb Williams, RDH Sports confirmed it. But why would you not? Why would you not go get that guy? Why would you not go get that guy? Because, like you said, it is one pick away. It is not going to take as much as it took in the previous draft, as much as they traded for RG3. Once again, the entire house. They traded the whole house in the backyard to get that quarterback, and now they have the opportunity to do it again. Does it happen? Does it not happen? I'm thinking it's pretty likely. But Chicago fans, I wouldn't let it happen, and I would jump in and just take Caleb Williams. You know what I mean? Like it's just really hard to sit there and justify that. Now, my last question about Washington: how much better does this position them? Even if they don't draft up for Caleb Williams, even if they don't trade up a pick, you have Cliff Kingsbury, the arguably in college football was the best quarterback developer in the entire country. And he's got the number 2 pick with every other quarterback that's probably not Caleb Williams. Like one of those guys has got to hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. You know what I mean? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But what do you think? Do you think that Cliff Kingsbury comes in and just this team can't get much worse, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think Washington's what do you think their ceiling is next season? How many games do you think they could win? I know it's hard because there's a skeleton bones for a roster right now.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. It's tough. But assuming, whichever quarterback they get is not Caleb Williams, I don't think it's going to change the team that much. I think they're going to have a lot of good offensive talent. Obviously, McLaurin's coming back. They've got some good guys, like I said before, on their offense. But they're going to have to really draft well, I think, throughout the rest of the draft, in the second, third rounds, and get their defense back up to shape and, kind of bolster that offense a little bit too. Because I think they were a decent offense. I don't think they were like the league's worst. Like you go over and look at like New England, you know what I mean? Like that was a pitiful case, but it's just
Hoop Mac Jones.
who's probably not going to be that quarterback next year either, but it's like they were still losing games and they're still the number 2 overall pick for a reason. Their offense is not working. Sam Howell is not working, even though, they technically have gotten production, but it's not winning them games. Their defense isn't working either. So it's like, I don't know what their ceiling could be. Right now, I'm going to say, assuming they get a quarterback that's not Caleb Williams, I'll say 7 wins. I think that's the ceiling, and I think that's a pretty safe ceiling, 7 or 8 wins. In the bottom of the barrel, the low, like the floor, 2. Like 2 wins. Because you don't know. Like, you really don't know with these quarterbacks. You've seen them come out. I've seen a lot of quarterbacks recently come out, and they just absolutely stink. So with a new system in place, new head coaches, everything revolving around that, I'll pump it up at 3 wins. How about that? That's the floor, but the ceiling can be 7 or 8 wins. So I think it's probably going to happen somewhere in there. I don't expect them to get a whole ton better, over this draft. I could be totally wrong. They go grab Michael Penix and he could be the next, CJ Stroud breaking every rookie record. But I'm not sure. I'm not sold on it right now. So, you know, I, I don't think they're going to get a whole lot better, but I do think they will get better. I think this draft will improve them just based on their position alone. In Washington is not a terrible drafting team. They've gotten a lot of good guys over the past couple seasons. You know, RG3 was probably the biggest one that would come to mind because, you mentioned it, and it's just, he doesn't get hurt. That's maybe a completely different team that we're looking at right now. But I'm going to say, ceiling 7 or 8, floor 2 or 3, because it's hard to go up from there. You really got to. They're in a rebuild. It's just that's true, and they're continuously getting rid of their best players. So they want picks, they want a lot of capital, and they're going to want to wait and develop these guys. So I think this is a slow process. I don't think it's going to turn around overnight, and I think Washington will get better in the coming years.
But it's gonna take a couple of years at least. I'm right there on the train with you. And also, yeah, Dan Quinn has had a pretty decent job at drafting, so it's gonna be all on him and all on that scouting and player personnel department, and not to mention just the existing contracts that Washington has. What are they going to do with those?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like is Scary Terry going to be gone? Tanner mentioned Brian Robinson. He's a really good player to kind of build around, but at the same time, if you see yourself sitting there in the third round or the end of the second, early third round, and Blake Corum sitting there, do you pull the trigger, right? Like what draft strategy does Washington have going into this draft? Is it just best player on the board? Because for me, what I've seen with NFL teams that are in the rebuild process, it doesn't really matter what position it is, unless it's a freaking quarterback. It doesn't matter it outside of a quarterback. They're just going to take the best player available on the board to try to hit on as many of those draft picks as they possibly can. Because remember, rounds 1, that's an automatic starter. Automatic starter, walk-in day 1 starter. Round 2, that's a pretty much an automatic starter, if not day 1, pretty soon to day 1. Then you get into the third round, and it's a starter at some point in the season. And then in the fourth round, it's almost like a player that you're hoping that could also start at some point in the season. The third round is more of a guy that's going to start early on in the season. Fourth round is going to be maybe later on. And then rounds 5 through 7, a lot of those guys aren't even on the practice squad. A lot of those guys don't even make the team. So if you're getting drafted in rounds 5 through 7, it's already stacked against you, right? And if you're not getting drafted in round 1, it's stacked against you, right? It's like you're a first round draft pick. You see how fast teams move on from these guys. And all it takes is 1 or 2 drafts. It takes 1 or 2 because Tanner said it, CJ Stroud. If they hit on a guy like CJ Stroud, it takes 1 draft. But I think there is a CJ Stroud in this draft class, and I think his name is Caleb Williams. And I can't say that there's another one with 100% confidence. You know what I mean? So we'll see what happens, but it makes the offseason a whole lot more fun for us, and I'm glad that you're listening. It wouldn't be an RDH Sports podcast if we didn't talk about the Cowboys, right? Last, part of the NFL news section of this podcast, coaching news section. Then we're going to jump up to the Super Bowl. Of course, we weren't going to miss the Super Bowl. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Dallas Cowboys news. Here we go. Obviously, with the depart of Dan Quinn, the former defensive coordinator, Dallas, interviews are underway for the defensive coordinator position. Reports interviews are underway as early as today with Mike Zimmer and Riverboat, Ron Rivera, and Vrabel is also a name that could be putting in there. So, Tanner, what do you think of each of those names? Because those are exciting.
Each of them, I'm going to start with what I think about each of these guys, and then I'm going to say who specifically I want. So when it comes to Mike Zimmer, I think he has a very good connection with Dallas. He's been connected with Dallas a lot, and he's been on the coaching staff at one point in time under Jerry Jones's reign. So I think there's a lot of familiarity there. And being a Cowboys fan, I really think that it could be a possibility that he is in Dallas this year as the DC. He took a year off from his head coaching position when he was with the Minnesota Vikings. But in my opinion, I don't think he's that great of an evaluator of talent. I think the Minnesota defenses that when he was a head coach, they weren't great. Minnesota has they were okay, but a lot of what we've been talking about is just like with Minnesota, it's like, you know what I mean? Like recently in the past, 10 years, 15 years, however, Minnesota's defense hasn't been that scary. You've got like guys who've come out that have been really good, who they've gotten, but it's like, Daniil Hunter when he's there, it's like okay, good season, but like who else?
Well, to hit real quick on your point, like you said, I think you nailed it perfectly. They haven't necessarily been the best in the league, but there's been key guys on there.
And
Couple more key guys: Harrison Smith, Julius Peppers. Keep going.
yeah, exactly. Like that's exactly where I was going next. Harrison's Hitman Smith, it's these big guys. It's just like okay, they have like one good guy. They got like two good guys. But like that's not a defense. They're good, but like when it comes to playoff time, like two people can't, win a football game on defense. So it's like I think they've had some jewels, some people that have hit, and they've kind of done well in offseason as well, like bringing in Eric Kendricks. Like that was a good move, but again, it's not the biggest. They haven't been the best defense like ever when he was at that head coaching job, and so it's like it just doesn't look very good on paper to me. I think he could have another chance, but I'm not a big fan of it. Anyway, moving on. Riverboat Ron, I'm not a big fan of this one either. I think his best season was in Carolina when he was the head coach for them, I think, and he was coaching Cam Newton. And they made that Super Bowl, and it's like, okay, this is cool, this is great, but like Riverboat Ron, when he went to Washington, did nothing. I mean, that team did not change at all. The defense was kind of given to him. They've, like we said, they've had pretty good defense over the past couple of years, but like, what have they done? They really haven't done anything. They made the playoffs that one year when Dak got hurt, and it was like, okay, they made the playoffs that year, but they got bounced first round, and it's like, who was their starting quarterback? Taylor Heineke. He wasn't the coach at that point, I don't think, but what has he done since that point? They haven't really done anything. They haven't really been competitive in a lot of games. They haven't beaten Dallas, I don't think, the entire time Riverboat Ron was there. So it's like that may be false, but like it feels like it. As a Cowboys fan, you're always like, okay, Washington, it's a free win. I'm sorry,
Same
but
with the Giants.
same with the Giants, but it's like I like the Giants head coach though, so it's like it's different, different situation. I like Dable, but Ron Rivera, I think his best years were in Carolina with Cam Newton, and I think he had a good squad. I really thought he put together a really nice squad. I like Cam Newton a lot, but he kind of fell off the earth pretty quickly after that whole Super Bowl thing and the debacle with that, and it's just they weren't the same since. Josh Norman, when he was over there, he was an elite corner. Came over to Washington afterwards, I think, or before, I'm not sure, but he's not like he was. It's just not the same. I'm not a big fan of Ron Rivera. I'm really not. I just don't think he's got what it takes anymore. I think that in my opinion, out of these guys on the list, I think Vrabel's the best candidate. But I haven't really heard his name connected to Dallas that much. So I think he's got that, that drive. I think he's got that culture, which is kind of what I really like in a head or in a coaching position. I think that, him being coached under Bill Belichick for however long he was, winning Super Bowls, I think that's a fantastic thing like on your resume to have. I think he understands the culture and what needs to be done to win Super Bowls. I'm really liking that with Vrabel, but a lot of teams aren't taking a chance on this guy for some reason or another. I don't know. I like Vrabel. Like I said, he would be my pick out of these three guys, but in my opinion, I don't want these three guys. I want someone else. I want Al Harris, who is currently the secondary backs coach for Dallas Cowboys. I think Dan Quinn brought him in. He's been there for a little bit. And this guy is electric, man. This guy has played with some of the best defense, some of the best players I've ever seen in the NFL. If you remember, he was on the Kansas City coaching staff, I think, from 2012 to 2018, I think, is something like that. It's somewhere in that range. But essentially, he coached Eric Berry and Marcus Peters, and he made them what they are kind of today. And so, in my opinion, I think he's really good. I think that, back in Seattle when he was there as well, Richard Sherman, man. Like, this guy is a secondary backs coach. Look at what the heck he did to Dallas' secondary right now. That was coming in when Dan Quinn was coming in, that was a hodgepodge group of a bunch of nobodies. This guy basically made Trayvon Diggs. He basically made Deron Bland what they are today. And these are ball hawking corners. And when he was in the NFL, I think he played like 12 seasons with the Packers, and he made like a all-pro. I think he won a Super Bowl in that as well. I think he checks all the boxes, man. I really like this guy, and from what I'm hearing on social media, the players really love him too. and they think he deserves a shot at the next DC. And in my opinion, Jerry likes to keep it in house. He really does. Why not go with this guy? Give a chance. The whole league is turning towards this younger defensive coordinator, or just a coordinator in general, kind of coach, up and coming guys. You don't want to, there's a reason Bill Belichick, Mike Vrabel haven't been signed to teams, because the young guns are taking over the NFL now. And I think Al Harris is a perfect candidate for that DC position. Keeps the scheme in place. Not a whole lot is changing, and he gets a chance to show us what he can do. So if the players like him, I like him, and I'm gonna stick with that. That's my opinion. It could be wrong, but I really like what he's done, his resume, and I think he stands above the rest of these other guys. Even though they've been in head coaching positions, I would love to take a chance on another guy. You don't know what he's going to bring. He's got new ideas, new stuff. And I'm kind of tired of just recycling head coaches, to be honest with you, in Dallas. Like I want some new blood in there, and Al Harris for DC.
I love it. You know what I mean? That's
Mhm.
why I threw this segment over to you, and my goodness, I'm glad I did. Here's what I'll say on the candidates so far. Mike Zimmer, that one's either going to hit or it's going to completely miss.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So that's a tough one, because he hasn't even, if I'm not mistaken, he hasn't been in the league since 2021. So we're going to need, that's not only going to take some time to come up to speed, that's going to come with some coaching errors. And on this coaching staff with Mike McCarthy, that's right. I know he's won 12 games, like 3 seasons in a row with the Cowboys, but Dallas has gotten out coached at the end of every season the last 3 years. And I think if you bring in a guy like Zimmer, it's the potential that you could get out coached again at the end of the season. Now,
Yeah.
maybe he comes in and the veteran comes in and just absolutely destroys and just throws the argument to bed for all the young bucks. But I don't know. I think if there's a trend in the NFL, people tend to follow it, and I tend to follow that trend. Did you say you found something on Zimmer, Tanner?
Yeah, no. I'm just talking back to Al Harris. He was not the secondary coach in Seattle, but he did coach in KC, and then Miami before that. And then he was a player until 2012 with the Packers. So yeah, still pretty good. But Eric Berry and Marcus Peters is pretty damn good. So I'm still riding with that one.
Oh, I mean, Eric Berry back in the day, before he went out of the league, I think it was actually for cancer, if I'm not mistaken. I think he
It
beat
was,
cancer when
unfortunately, he
he
did.
was, yeah, yeah, and he was awesome. I mean, that dude was one
Mhm.
of the best safeties in his time for those few couple years that he did it. So huge, huge Eric Berry fan. And Marcus Peters, I mean, that corner is like, he runs with the ball all the way out here to the side.
I hate
You
that.
know what I mean? But God, that's an exciting player.
Yeah,
He's either going to get a 15-yard, penalty, or he's going to get the interception. Like that guy literally is the definition of excitement when it comes to
sounds
players. But
pretty familiar.
literally the Dallas Cowboys secondary. But like I was going to say, I'm hitting on your last points there
Mhm.
with Al Harris. I never thought about that, and the reason I think I didn't think about that was because I kind of always assumed he'd be gone with Dan Quinn.
Mhm.
Like that's my biggest thing, is he's going to be gone. So not only is this something that needs to happen now, this is something that would need to, begin today, because Dan Quinn, is already the head coach, right? He's already signed his offensive coordinator. I'm not sure if Washington has signed their defensive coordinator. I think at this point, since we're recording at the podcast, that Washington has not signed their defensive coordinator to this point, but that's huge, right? Because he could just as easily bring him over on the coaching staff with him. So that would be my only question in that, would be like, hey, Dallas, we got to do this pretty quick. But I agree, and I'm on board. Now, Riverboat Ron, I think he'd be a pretty good defensive coordinator, because he's only focusing on the defense. And when he focused on the defense in Carolina, that was kind of what their backbone was. They also had Julius Peppers and Luke Kuechly. It's pretty decent
It's pretty
tandem there,
good.
pretty decent duo there. But and then the last candidate, Vrabel, I think that'd be an immediate upgrade. I think that Dallas is in need of a locker room change. I think they're in need, not necessarily a locker room change, but maybe a little bit of locker room revamp, because I didn't like how the season fell off at the end there for the defense. And I think if a guy walks in like Vrabel, I think the door's getting kicked open off the hinges. The door's fallen completely off. You know what I mean? And Vrabel's walking in, everyone's like, let's freaking go. You
Yep.
know what I mean? Like that's a guy that you're just ready to run through a wall for. And I also think Dan Quinn was that guy. I mean, Dan Quinn was the players coach. And I think that you really need to keep the players coach aspect of it. Mike Zimmer, not sure players coach. Riverboat Ron, I've heard some, interviews with players where they say he's a players coach and others where I haven't. So big question marks there, but we had to report on it because most likely by this time next week, Dallas is gonna have themselves a new DC. Any other notes you want to hit on the DCs for Dallas, Tanner, or are we jumping to the Super Bowl section?
I think we're ready to go to the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl, Tanner, go ahead and update the listeners with results from our full season
Our full
of picks.
season is I went 68-40. I don't remember if we went over this last week. I was 1-1 in the championship round with, I'm pretty sure I picked KC and I picked Detroit. So close on the Detroit one. So close. Chad picked the other teams. He picked Baltimore and he picked San Francisco. So we both went 1-1, which is awesome. It's going to put us up and hopefully a grand finish, for this final week of NFL picks. Like I said, I'm 68-40. Chad is 67-41. So if I were to win this Super Bowl pick, then I would win the season with a whopping 69 wins. But if I lose, if I pick the wrong person, then we'll be tied on the season. So I'm in a great position. But Chad's looking to regain, potentially make this tied. And we're going to move on for the Chiefs versus the Niners. If you've been living under a rock, is the current Super Bowl. And these are probably, in my opinion, not the two best teams in the NFL this season, but probably the teams that most deserve to be there.
Definitely. And it's hard to pick this game because in terms of roster, I think San Francisco has them. I think San Francisco has Kansas City beat. I think San Francisco has the best roster in the NFC. And I think that this past season, I thought Josh Allen was going to be there for the AFC and or Lamar Jackson. Not going to lie to you. I counted the Chiefs out. I picked against them. I made it known that I picked against them. And that's just what Patrick Mahomes does. The dude's already won over 14 playoff games. And it seems like he's only been in the league, like he's only signed one contract, which is just absolutely insane that he's still going at the rate that he's going. But once again, the roster on San Francisco, that's a really hard roster to play against. But when you look at Kansas City's road to where they've gotten, I think they've had the hardest road in the playoffs with the teams that they've played and the teams that they've beat. They beat a really good Miami Dolphins team that fell apart at the end of the season. Seems to be the case every year with them. They beat a really good Baltimore Ravens team, and they beat a really good Buffalo Bills team that they shouldn't have beat. So it's hard to pick against Kansas City for me, but I'm going to do it again. I'm going to pick against Kansas City again because I have a feeling you're going to go for the Chiefs because you've picked the Chiefs. So I'm already going against you because that's not fun if we pick the same team for the Super Bowl, right? We got to have at least different ones. So I'm going to go Niners here. I think the Niners are going to take it mainly because Patrick Mahomes' luck is going to run out, right? You know what I mean? I can't be confident making this pick. I'm not going to be confident saying the 49ers are going to go in and beat the Kansas City Chiefs because I'm not. I know the 49ers are favored right now by about 1.5 that I saw on the odds today. I'm not going with the team that's favored because I'm not very confident. I'm going with them because of the roster. I'm going with them because they have a fully healthy Deebo Samuel. Christian McCaffrey is going to be going. George Kittle is going to be going. The offensive line's ready to go. The defensive line's ready to go. San Francisco is ready to go. California's ready to go. And everybody's got to go in for this freaking team because to beat Patrick Mahomes, it's a war.
It is.
And you got to have everybody on your side against this kid because if you don't, he's going to destroy you. So I got the Niners, and I think it's going to be about 1.5 points. It's going to be close.
I think it's going to be a really close game because obviously I'm going to pick against the Chiefs, but I do want to talk about the Niners and the chance that they do have because the Super Bowl is in Vegas, right?
Year.
And how close is Vegas to the Sunshine State of California? Very close. Very, very close. So I think this is going to be a big home game. for the Niners, but I think you'll see some KC fans. They like to travel well, but I think that's going to be a majority of Niners fans in that stadium. So I think they're loud. Trust me, they're very loud. I think you're going to hear them, and I think they're going to be very significant and influential to the game. So I think that's going to be a big factor. And I think another big factor too with the Niners is, will they start slow? Because in these two playoffs games that we've seen them, they've kind of started slow and they've not really gotten off to the best start. And they've kind of had to fight back. They've kind of had to come back and claw back their way into games, specifically that Detroit game. They really didn't put up a good first half. That second half was amazing from them. It's kind of like we can do what you did in the first half in our second half, just kind of flip flopping. But and against the Green Bay game, against the Packers in that game, it was looking scary for them at one point, and they came back and they won. But I'm going to go to KC. I think that Patrick Mahomes, like you said, has had the toughest road to get here, and I think the defense in particular with KC has played really, really well. I think you got Chris Jones playing at probably one of the best levels, the highest levels I've seen him play in his career. He's just a dominant force, and it's hard to stop him. You got to put a lot of guys on him, and that's going to put a lot of resources into one player, which you don't like to do if you're on offense. But we've seen defensive tackles, we've seen defensive linemen just take over in big games, and I think that's what he's going to do. Also, not to mention L'Jarius Sneed, who is having one of the greatest NFL postseasons I've seen, just in terms of individual accomplishments. I mean, that knockout, the touchback in the AFC championship games against Zay Flowers, that was all him. That was a Super Bowl making play right there. Like, that play alone put them in the Super Bowl, which is insane. He did that by himself in probably on the biggest stage, and it's routine. He's been a very good corner in the past couple of years with KC, so I really like KC's defense. I think they're playing their best ball right now, and Patrick Mahomes has a good defense going into a Super Bowl after he's playing, one of his better postseasons. He's on the road. It's like it's the hardest road he's ever had, but it doesn't look like it's that challenging to him. Him and Travis Kelce have found their new relationship, and Taylor Swift is there too. They're getting all coddly and cozy together, and I love it, man. I'm going to go, obviously, KC. I think that they're winning another Super Bowl. I think that it's going to be really close, though. I think that, I just draw comparisons from that Niners-Chiefs Super Bowl from a couple of years ago back, and I think like 2019 or so, and it's going to be one of those games. It's going to come down to one or two plays, and I think the KC's going to get the better of them on those two plays, and I'm not picking against the greatness of Patrick Mahomes. I haven't all postseason, and I'm not going to start now. So give me the Kansas City Chiefs, another Super Bowl. I do want to ask a question to you, though, because I've heard it, swarming around. I've heard there's rumors. Does Andy Reid retire after this Super Bowl if they win it? I've heard some rumors. I've heard some potential things of that nature because he's got a great resume. Personally, I wouldn't, but I would like to hear your thoughts on it.
I mean, that's an interesting take. Personally, I have not seen those reports. So I'm kind of bummed you said that to me, because I was flying under the rock on that one. And if it happened, I would have called you and be like, "Well, look what just happened." But I mean, why not ride off into the sunset?
Exactly.
But at the same time, like, I mean, Mahomes, dude. Like, how do you leave? How would Andy Reid look at himself in the mirror with that just clean lip sweater he's got going, right? Mm-hmm. Cheeseburger wrapper on the floor, right? Picture of a grandkid in the like the left side of the mirror, right? How does he look at himself in the face and be like, "Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and walk away from Patrick Mahomes in his prime"? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's a football guy. But if there's a time to do it, it's winning a Super Bowl and going away. You know what I mean? And there's multiple guys on that, multiple guys being coordinators on that Chiefs team that could quite literally just be promoted and be a head coach just like that. Mm-hmm. Now, you're not going to have the magic of Andy Reid, and I do think that this team takes a significant hit with a coach that is not Andy Reid, because that's like taking away Belichick in Tom Brady's prime. But it's an option. But I think every single person in Kansas City would start a GoFundMe to keep that man if they could, and I think I think that, like, general managers like, obviously, Andy Reid's not gonna be like, "Hey, I'm walking away, see you later." You know what I mean? And go sign with another NFL team. If that were to happen, then, like, all hell breaks loose. But, like, if it's just Andy Reid walking away because he wants to be retired, I respect it, I understand it. He's got grandkids, he's very vocal on how close he wants to be with his family. So, yes, this is definitely the time that he could do it, but if he does, I'm gonna be sad. You know what I mean? I'm gonna be real sad if he does. Do you think he could walk away at this point?
I don't think he will, but I've just kind of heard it coming around, going around. It's like, oh, this is would be an excellent opportunity to do so, but I think
Yeah,
he's still got a lot more years left. I think he's still kind of, one of the brighter minds in the NFL, being, in the situation that he is. And I think he's still cooking. I think he's still cooking when it comes to these play calls and when it comes to these this stuff that he's cooking up. And it's just like, why would you? Because I think there's still another Super Bowl in that future. It's somewhere along the line. So, uh,
if
Pat,
not a couple.
Patrick Mahomes is going to win more Super Bowls. What has he won? 2 right now? And he's been
Yep.
to how many? 3? 4?
No. Yes. He's because he only lost
He lost to Tom Brady in
he
that one
lost well,
Super Bowl.
he's only lost to Tom and Joe, but he only lost to Tom in the Super Bowl, right? Because he lost to Joe. He can't
Well,
he can't go to the Super Bowl if you're in the AFC.
well, yeah, because we also lost to Tom when he was early on in his career in the AFC Championship game. Off of that,
Exactly.
So I think I think he's 2-3, if I'm not
That's
mistaken.
pretty
Hey,
2
do
and
some
1.
research, listeners, and get back to us. We'll see what it is. But
It's the end of the pod. Give us a break,
yeah, I'm
right?
not. I'm looking. I don't need to go look at Patrick Mahomes Super Bowls. No offense, but like I think it's 2-3. But in the game that he didn't play, he still played really, really, really well. And yeah, man, I don't know if Andy Reid's gonna retire. Personally, if I were in his shoes, which I'm not, I don't think like him, but I wouldn't. Just there's so much left on that. Patrick Mahomes' future, and I think there's at least a Super Bowl or 2 more in there too. So, no, I don't think he should. I don't think he will. But I was kind of curious to see if you would have potentially leaned the other way.
I have one thing I actually want to bring up for you. I saw a tweet, or sorry, a post on Instagram from Hoops Nation, and I have to call this out because you're the Spurs guy, you're the Wimby guy specifically, and I want to read this to you. So Rudy Gobert,
I saw this.
2018 Defensive Player of the Year season, 44 steals and 129 blocks. Wembanyama's first 42 games, 47 steals, 134 blocks. That's insane. That's insane. I remember that 2018 season when Gobert was just locking people down.
hmm
In Wimby, it's like you see all of the stuff, on the media going back to Chet and everything, which I understand because Chet's playing really well. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Chet at OKC, but it's like Wembanyama, there's no way he can fly under the radar. But at the same time, it's like that. I can't believe that stat. That stat is insane and is a testament of how good this kid is, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is, I've been saying it for the past year or so. When the Spurs got the number 1 overall pick, I was excited because we haven't seen someone like this in the NBA, period. This is the best prospect we've seen since LeBron James, and he's showing it every single game. He's continuously getting better and better and better throughout this season, and I think it's great. He's learning how to survive in this NBA system. He's learning how to contribute to his teammates, and he's putting himself in great positions. Now, the other Spurs players, which I've kind of, I'll say pooped on him a little bit. I've kind of put him under the rug, but like, I think they have good depth players, I think, but we'll see what happens moving forward. I think they have a good foundation. I think Wemby's going to make this franchise really good in the upcoming years, and he's amazing. It's just that simple. He's amazing. It's impossible to game plan against someone like this who can just go in there and wreck a game. Obviously it sucks when like Wemby gets dunked on, but this guy, it doesn't matter to him. He'll come back the next play and he'll just throw one down on you. And he'll just like sit there and just put the ball in the net over you. He doesn't even need to jump. He's that big. It's just one of those things. He's a generational talent and he's showing it. He's averaging, I think, over 20 points as a rookie, almost 10 rebounds as a rookie, and a couple blocks. So it's like, what? He's almost averaging a double double in his rookie season, playing half, like not even the full minutes that he could be playing. Like he's not playing as much as he could be. He's already showing up in big games when the Spurs want him to be the guy. He's like, I got you. This is my city. I got you. So it's going to be interesting to see where the Spurs go from here. But that guy is, he's going to be there for a long, long time. I promise you, San Antonio fans, he's going to be potentially a defensive player of the year in his future. If he continues to do even a little bit of what he's doing right now, yes, absolutely. There are so many good defensive players in the NFL, but he's doing this against the best of the best in his rookie season. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So I'm curious to see what they put around him in the upcoming drafts and stuff like that. Curious to see how this team develops as a whole. I really like its core unit right now. I think they're getting better and better, and they're learning to be more of a team. But you put I've seen this argument going around, and I do agree with it. But it's like you put Wemby in a team that has a top 3 seed, or a top 4 seed, and that team's disgusting. That team is just absolutely insane with the amount of talent that's surrounded around him. But I think this is just probably the number 1 star on the upcoming stars list. Like the however many prospects under 25 or 24 or whatever you want to do, but he's amazing, and he's going to continue to be amazing for, I think, his whole career.
I'm gonna have to agree with you because you're the Spurs guy and you're the Wemby guy specifically. Watch a ton more games, but yeah, he's such an exciting prospect. And another, I guess he's not technically a prospect anymore. He's already won a World Cup. But jumping over to the last point of the podcast, we have to report on this because I'm the PSG guy of the podcast for soccer. My literal player, my guy is Kylian Mbappe, and it is reports confirmed. We'll see what that means in the offseason. We've already gone through this a couple times in terms of Mbappe and Real Madrid, but it is said that Mbappe is signing with Real at the end of this season. Sucks that kind of leaked right before the Champions League started. I don't think PSG really needed that. Every single card was already kind of stacked against them, and this is another one. But hey, for me as a PSG fan, it's really hard to see him go if he does going, but I completely understand it. There's nothing more he can do at PSG aside from win a Champions League. And PSG brought in a ton of, top tier talent like Neymar, Messi, all these guys. And nothing ever really worked out, right? They never really got past that round of 16 to try to get there, to get up to the Champions League to, potentially bring that trophy home. And that's the hardest thing going forward, because this year PSG took a step in the young direction and went and got a ton of prospects, which I love that they did that. But I think that that's also sending a clear message like, look, we're getting ready to, start going through some times here. And I mean, they're going to be competitive. It's no offense to any other teams in League One, but PSG's won League One for how many years now? You know what I mean? And Kylian Mbappe goes away. Do I think that they still win League One? Yeah. Like I think they do, and I think they still secure their spot to potentially play for the Champions League, but I don't see them going very far without Mbappe. You know what I mean? I think Mbappe has saved them in many games, majority of his career there. But if this is his last season at PSG, one of the biggest fans on the planet, and have watched him since AS Monaco and couldn't believe it when he went to, my club PSG back in the day and have every single jersey of his. But just wanted to call that out. And last thing I'll say, can you imagine Mbappe, Vinny Jr., and Jude Bellingham on the same team? I mean, my God, that's disgusting. Okay, that's all I got for this episode.
It's gonna be pretty gross, but like Real has been that squad a couple times, and they just got young guys. They just come out of the woodwork. They just show up, and they're just like the best players in the world. And it's like, where did you find this guy? Oh, he's been on our under 16s for like 4 years, and it's like, oh, cool, thanks. But I obviously he's been linked to Real for the past like 4 years. I think it's finally going to happen after this Champions League season, because that's pretty much like kind of like what we mentioned with Andy Reid, but like that's his high horse that he will hopefully ride off on. If they win the Champions League, I could totally see him leaving. Even if they don't win, I could see him leaving, man. But I really hope,
so nice.
Really hope
if he wins,
ride off in the sunset with Mbappe. Finally get it, that monkey off their back, and then they're like, all right, see you later. But it's like, yeah, I think Real, they've been trying to do this for the past like 4 years, so hopefully it'll finally go through, and that squad's gonna be nasty like they are every year.
Literally. Well, that was a good podcast. We will see you folks next episode for more sports talk.
Bye bye.